So the cool thing about Masonry, and we talked a little bit about this behind the scenes, but it's this idea that Masonry itself is a tool. And then whatever it is that you use that tool for, whether it be to be a Napoleon Bonaparte and, essentially conquer most of Europe because he was a Freemason, or if you were, that's why he didn't
Wait
get
a second.
executed. Yeah, that's why he didn't get
Wait a
executed
second.
because
I wanted to make a video. Sorry for interrupting. I'm not interrupting my
please.
guests usually, but you
No.
just dropped a bomb there, and
I do love to do
I want to push back a little bit against it because based on my own personal research, I don't have insider information, but people are still debating if Bonaparte was a Freemason. Now, for me personally, the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of the fact that he was one, but that they destroyed either the documents and we don't have actual physical proof that he was a Freemason. But if you look at his life, his family, his relatives were grandmasters throughout Europe of Masonic jurisdictions. So even the symbolism of his tomb, his expeditions into Egypt, because it was thanks to the Napoleonic expeditions that we were finally able to find the Rosetta Stone and decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics. So there's a lot of there are a lot of esoteric elements in the Napoleonic lore. So why are you so certain that he was a Freemason? I'm not allowed to say that, but
well, I understand that certain people, like in history, are almost, there's a phrase that we like to use called "too big to fail." So it's like when when a bank it needs to be bailed out by the government and they're about to collapse, rather than the government letting them collapse, they bail them out. And there's certain institutions that are what we think is too big to fail. But there's so many instances where really great men were still executed, were still killed. And so Napoleon was one of those people where I really do believe that if he wasn't a Freemason, that he would have been executed. Again, people argue, oh, well, the reason why is because people knew that if you killed him, you would just make a martyr out of him. I don't really believe that. I really do think that the British Empire was more than powerful enough to have just chopped that dude's head off and called it a day. Shot him square between the eyebrows, called it a day. Firing squad, whatever the hell you want. But they decided twice to sequester him to an island. And so there's a myth, there's a fun Masonic myth that essentially, because there's this thing called the grand hailing sign, which is whenever you're in a moment of absolute distress where your life is in jeopardy, you give the grand hailing sign, and any Mason that's present has to do everything within their power to save your life. Everything that is within their power, unless it risks losing their own. So there's a myth that essentially when he was on trial, that when he was given the death penalty, he did the grand hailing sign. And because this is the British, this is the royalty of Europe, obviously, that we're talking about, they were all Masons. They were all Freemasons. And so by their Masonic obligation, they could not kill Napoleon. Now, again, you could just say, oh, well, like people have, betrayed their obligations. Like, why does that matter? Again, this is all political theater, right? And this is all, and also, again, like there probably was like this type of like, I almost like, I respect you, as much as I hate you, Napoleon, I respect you kind of a thing, potentially. Again, this is all part of like, this is total, mythology, Masonic mythology, but it's this idea that because and then the second time when they did it again, they were like, okay, this time, we what's the word I'm looking for? Where they send people. I'm trying to remember the term when they send people off like to an island or something. Anyway, you're banished. Exile. Thank you. I don't know why I couldn't think of the word, but they exiled him twice. And so to me, it's like, again, like after the first, shame on fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. Like I'm gonna. Like now you're on the guillotine, you know what I mean? But no, they didn't. So twice it's supposed that he gave the grand hailing sign, and so they were like, shit, we can't kill. So they're like, okay, fine, we're gonna send you to St. Helena, and luckily that's where he stayed and died. But I personally believe that the reason why they didn't execute him was, again, one, political. It was a political thing. Two, out of respect, and three, part of it is because he was a Freemason. So. I think that all of those things could be very, very true.
I had no idea about that. See, when you are an initiate, you know more things. I didn't know about that sign where Freemason is supposed to save you. It's an interesting fact.
Yeah. It's, there's a really cool there's a really cool, I believe it's called, I forget what the statue is called, but there's a statue in Washington, D.C., and it was actually one of the very first times, because I went to Washington, D.C. in 8th grade to see the different monuments and see like the Declaration and all these different things. And one of the things that really was striking was there's this statue, and it's essentially a Union officer aiding a Confederate officer who's on the ground, and essentially, and it has a big square and compass, and it's like, you know, essentially this whole thing about brotherly love, that even though these people were on two opposite sides of the most brutal war in American history, no other war has had the same level of American casualties than the American Civil War, obviously. And so you know, but like the fact that these two brothers who are so diametrically opposed could in a moment, you know, transcend that and, you know, aid one another. It's this idea of distress, of Masonic distress, and that happened many times in World War. In fact, if you don't mind entertaining, the reason why you asked me a long time ago why, or like at the beginning, why I became a Freemason. So can I give you like a short story of what actually made me seek out a lodge?
Absolutely. Go ahead.